Today's leather tip video is answering a question from Bailey, and she asks, what is the best way to prepare your leather for tooling? So when we look at that, we're going to be talking about this veg tan leather that we're tooling on, and most of the leather that you're going to be tooling on is a thinner leather. So what I mean is less than skirting, less than the full thickness that a leather hide is going to come in. So most of your hides, when you order those, are going to be a 3/4 ounce, a 5/6 ounce, an 8/9 ounce, a 9/10 ounce, and that's just talking about the thickness of the leather. Most projects that you're doing are probably anywhere from a 5-ounce leather up to a 9 or 10 ounce leather. All of those, I'm going to be taping the back. First thing I do is tape the back of that. And the reason I tape that is because we want to prevent stretch in that leather when we tool it. So this tape that I use is just a clear packing tape. It's nothing special, doesn't have to be a certain kind. This stuff kind of comes in a few different ranges. The really cheap stuff, the really expensive stuff, and then that middle range. The really cheap stuff I don't like. I don't think it has as good of a hold to it. And then when you go to take it off, it can rip quite a bit, and it takes you a while to get that off of there. Now the really expensive stuff, I just think it's maybe overkill. I don't know that you need that, so I try to keep my costs down a little bit by just going with the mid-range. I find that holds really well. But I just tape right over the back of those, and you can see I'm making sure to press those down when you get done so it's good coverage on that tape and it's stuck to it really well. But why do we tape it like that? The reason I tape that is to prevent stretching in the leather. So when we're tooling that leather when it's wet, and the reason for wetting that is that leather is going to move when we strike it down with the tool. And part of that taking the impression and having that leather move is it needs to move in a direction somewhere. So if we're wetting that leather down and striking our tools and we don't have the back tape, that leather's just going to squish out to the side. So if you tool on something for a while, it's going to eventually just push out there, and it's going to distort the size of your project and not give you the depth in your tooling that you're after. So when we tape the back of this, that actually keeps things held right down in place. I'm going to trim that off there, but it keeps our leather held in place. It doesn't allow that to stretch. So when we strike a tool down, that leather is going to come up somewhere else, and that's when we start getting a little bit more depth in our tooling there. So talking about getting that leather wet, that's my next thing for preparing my leather for tooling. Again, she asked, what's the best way to prepare my leather for tooling? Now you're going to hear different theories on this. Some people will say you have to soak it all the way through, put it in water, let the bubbles stop, put it in a bag, put it in the fridge, 24 hours, 48 hours. There's different theories on it, and it's not that they're wrong. It's just they're different ways to do it. But the overall thing that we're doing is casing the leather, which means we're just getting our moisture content right in there. Especially with a thinner leather like this, we don't need to soak it overnight and all that. I think that gets to be a little overkill for something like this project here. So I'm going to wet this down. This is just water with a sponge. And I'm going to show you a few different ways. So one, I just wet that down once, right? Really quick. We'll set that one aside. This next one, I'm going to wet this down, and I'm watching for how quick that water's absorbing in there. So I want to get good coverage. You can see the darkness of that leather as it's wet, and I'm watching how quick that absorbs. So we can see that starting to absorb. It's absorbing pretty evenly, and it's taken just a second now for it to all absorb, but it still absorbs in there. Now I'm going to go the next level, and we're going to keep wetting this down. I'm going to keep wetting this down. Now this, I feel like I'm going to get this one actually to where it's going to be what I would consider too wet. Now we can always give it time to dry. That's not a problem. But this gets into a little bit deeper question about how to keep that leather the right moisture content when you're tooling. We're going to address that probably in answering another question that's very similar to this. So be sure to keep an eye out for future tip videos on that. But I'm just going to allude to some of that here in this video. Now you can see this one, it's still not absorbing up there very good. It's taken quite a while. We'll just add, I dripped on that other one. Whoops. We'll add more. You can see that's dripping off of there now. We have so much water that's dripping off, it's not absorbing in all the way. So this one I would consider to be too wet to tool on. I can look at the back and it's soaked clear through the back. Okay, that is soaked all the way through on that leather. Now, this first one here where we just went right over it, all we did was wet the surface of that down, and it's drying out pretty well right now. I mean, you can see over here we're back to almost dry leather. This still has just a barely amount of that surface leather wet still. Now this one here, remember we wet that down, watch for it to absorb. It took a second to absorb, but was still absorbing pretty evenly across there. But it took just a minute before it would absorb. I'm not soaked all the way through, in contrast to this one. So it took it a second to absorb, which tells me my moisture is getting down into that leather. It's taking it a minute to take more leather on, but that's holding that color a little bit better, right? Because that moisture is down in there. This one here would be ready to go on and tool. I can run my knife on this one, and that feels like it's cutting in really good, nice and smooth. When I go to cut this one, it's a little more drag. I'm not getting the depth that I want in my cut. And when I do this one, it's real mushy. Feels like I'm pushing that leather around. You can almost see that welling up a little bit on the sides of my cut there. It looks real mushy, almost like I'm cutting into Play-Doh. So that's too wet. That cut's not even wanting to open up. It's just mushing right back together there. Now, when I hit those with a bevel, let me grab the right bevel here. This one here, you kind of have, it's a feel and a listen. All right, now let's look at our results here. This one here, we got our bevel, but we're not getting a lot of the dark burnishing color that we're after. So it's just not coloring up. It sounds a lot harder when we're tooling that, and just doesn't have the feel that we're after there. This one, it was too wet. It's mushy feeling. It's pushing that leather back away, exposing kind of the inside of that cut line. You can see that white cut line a little bit in there. So it's pushing the leather back. And we're not getting the dark burnishing color that we're after either. Now this one that we have prepared correctly, we get a nice smooth bevel line, a dark burnish in that color that we're getting, and it feels good and consistent as I'm running that bevel in there. So that's, again, just a quick little look at three different ways there. Not enough water in the prep, too much water in the prep, and more of just right. Now, again, if you happen to over prep your leather and you're too wet, when you start cutting in there, it feels too wet, just wait and let it dry. It'll dry back out and get to where you can tool it up good. If you get in there and it feels too dry, you need to add some water in. But we'll get into a little bit more of those details in another tip video, but I hope this answered the question well of how to best prepare my leather for tooling. Don't forget to tape that back, wet that down, watching for how quick that absorbs. If you enjoy tips like this, be sure to subscribe to get more. And also, if you want a lot of these skills all in one place, be sure to check out our website. There's a link in the description below where we've put together a couple different very useful courses that get you all the tips you need in one spot to get you off and running in your leather journey. So thanks for being a part of this, and look forward to seeing you in the next video.